This is part 3 of the A Sign of the Times series. I was in some cage on a wagon entering a town. People were standing at the side of the road cheering at us. I could see that some Roman soldiers were escorting me. The problem was that I was in chains in a cage. I felt tears going down my face as I realized that I was not home yet. It was still as if I was in some Hollywood film. There was another girl in the same cage next to me. She looked very afraid. I wondered who she was in this world, and why were we being paraded through some ancient town. I wanted to ask so many questions, but this was impossible as people were jeering at us and throwing rotten fruit at us. I had to sigh thinking that this was not the greatest start to the new adventure that I was being forced upon. We arrived at what looked like to be a palace. The guards opened the cage and dragged the two of us out. We were dragged through some dark passageways. The girl that was with me shouted at the guards not to treat me like an animal. This made me mad at the magic book that sent me here. I was finally a princess, but I was in chains and about to be thrown in some dark cell. The guards laughed as we were thrown into the cell. They called us animals and barbarians. I sat in a corner as I could not help but cry. Ever since I was sent by the magic book, I have been in the worst situations ever and my life was always on the line. It is no surprise that I was once again in a dangerous situation. I asked the girl what her name was. She told me her name was Frida and then asked me how I could forget that. I said I must have hit my head or something because I could not remember who I was and how we got here. You and I come from Caledonia, Scotland. You were born a princess and lived in the big hut. You and I were best friends since I could remember. I knew you were the daughter of the chief and this was important, but you did not care about status. We both liked being friends and had many fun games and experiences. We lived in peace and never thought the Romans would invade the north. I remember that the elders would tell stories about Romans. They were great warriors but was ruthless and never showed any mercy. We were afraid of them but believed they would never come to the north. They did however and the chiefs in the north met with your dad. You and I heard them speak that the Romans were preparing to come to the north. The other chiefs wanted to unite and in this way, they could defend everyone against the Romans. Your dad did not agree and tried to persuade the others that the Romans just wanted some money. If we paid them some gold, they would leave us alone. The whole idea of uniting together fell apart. This did not make your father very popular in our tribe. Even your mom was mad at your dad, calling him a weak coward. This was hard for you as your parents were fighting and your father was so unpopular. The Romans did invade, and slowly one tribe was defeated and then another one. We heard of one massacre after another one. This worried your dad, so he did what everyone did not want him to. He surrendered to the Romans and offered them gold and animals to be left alone. The Romans accepted the surrender and gave your dad permission to continue to lead the tribe. Of course, this means he is only a puppet for the Romans. The tribe now has to work harder than ever to give the Romans food and gold. I heard my dad say that we are nothing more than slaves now. The Romans wanted more. They wanted you as a hostage. You would be taken to Rome and they said you will be a Roman. Your mother screamed and cried about this. She pleaded to your father to have the courage and say no to the Romans. However, your dad agreed and gave you to a Roman officer. You were confused and started crying and begging your dad to go. Your mother supported you by saying you were only 11 seasons old and still too long. Your dad did not even answer. I was crying too and did not want you to be alone in Rome. So I begged your mother to let me go with you. Your dad and my parents didn't like this idea, but your mom pushed me to the Romans. The officer said he would take me as well. Do you remember anything? I lied as I nodded. I hugged her and said I was happy that I was not alone. I told her that we just had to do what the Romans wanted and show we were nice girls that did not cause any drama and were not brats. At the same time, I was trying to remember from my history classes about the Romans. All I could remember was that lions ate Christians. This made me think that I should not mention God or Jesus. Then I thought about my dad here. How could he give up to his daughter to the Romans? I know that my real dad from 2020 would never give me up. I shed a tear as I remembered my real mom and dad. They must be so worried about where I was. They would never understand that I was being thrown through history. Who would ever think that? The best thing I could do was pray for my parents and believe that one day I would see them again. Now I was a princess from some primitive tribe. I was a prisoner in Rome. I was now a princess that was surrendered to the Romans as a prisoner or hostage. I could feel both anger and fear. I never wanted to meet my dad that was the king now, as I would give him a piece of my mind. I hated the man for giving up his daughter. My thoughts were interrupted by a man visiting the cell. I was told that he was the emperor himself. He looked very small and very fat. He looked ugly. I quickly bowed when he came in as I wanted to show him my respect. He just stood there and looked up and down at me. The only thing that he said was that it was a shame that I was not a boy. He told the officer that was with him that he needed time to think about what should be done with me. Before he left, he said that we should be given Roman attire. So Frida and I were given some white togas. Frida's was plain white and I could see the cloth was a bit coarse. The toga I had some gold embroidery and a woolen belt. We now looked Roman and even the guard said we did not look like barbarians. We had to wait for the emperor to see us again. We were still kept in the dark cell which had a small window. Frida said she wondered what would happen to us. I did not say anything as I started thinking. We would most likely be slaves for the Romans. This would be a hard life, as it meant that I would be owned and could do what I wanted to do. I would be doing chores all day and I would never get any rest. I also wondered if my owner would be nice or mean. I did not want to be whipped or starved. The other option was death. I could be crucified or fed to some lion. The magic that got me here could bring me home. Maybe death would be the best option as it would only be a short time that I would suffer. The problem is, what if the magic did not help? I did not want to die yet. I did not even want to be here. I wanted to be in 2020 with my parents. 2 guards came to get us. They told us the emperor wanted to speak with us. I could feel my heart beating quickly and I was shaking. We were taken to the palace where the emperor was sitting. The palace was a very posh place, with lots of marbles and pillars and statues. There was gold everywhere. Slaves were busy doing their chores while the emperor sat on a sofa and was drinking some wine. I still thought he was ugly and it was hard to believe that he was the most powerful man in the world. He was also the man that could decide my fate. I stood before him as he hardly looked at me. He told me that I was a guest and Rome would treat me well. He knew that I was afraid and confused as to why I was taken away from my parents and taken far away to Rome. He explained that I was insurance that Caledonia will not fight the Romans. It would be a sign of peace between Caledonia and Rome, and proof that both can live together. You have been a princess in a primitive land. He continued, you will be a princess in Rome. You will be a special guest of this palace. We will treat you like a princess and teach you the Roman traditions and culture. In time, you will be a Roman and this will help your homeland if you ever go back. I want you to feel safe here and happy. You will have everything that you desire. I curtsied and thanked the emperor for his kindness. I knew that I was more than a guest. I was a hostage. If my homeland did not do as Rome commanded, then my life would be in danger. I wondered if my father even cared. It did seem like that he gave me up very easily. Maybe if I was a boy, he would have fought some more or had more courage. Frida was told that she would be a slave and her job was to take care of me and do as I commanded her to do. I felt bad that she was a slave. How can anyone force another person to be a slave, as it felt strange thinking of another human being property. Despite my feelings about it, Frida was content with being my slave. She explained later it meant that we will be together and it was better than death. I suppose that I had to get used to the way things were in the Roman days. I found out that a third of the people were slaves. Life in the palace was great. The emperor had a son that was like a crown prince. He was a bit older than me. The emperor hoped that we would get on together and I tried this. We had classes where we learned about Roman history, the gods, and how to read and maths. The school was very difficult and the teacher was very strict. He had no problem in slapping us, especially the crown prince. When we were not at school, then it was like being on a holiday camp. I could swim and take long walks in beautiful gardens. I could also do hobbies such as weaving or pottery. I did feel bad for Frida, especially when I was swimming. She was not allowed to participate in anything, she just looked at me doing things and waited for my next command. Life as a slave was not fun. Despite all this, she had a smile on her face all the time and never complained when I asked for something. I had to remember all the time not to take her for granted, or to think she was some pet that would do my every wish. She was a human being. The crown prince's name was Cato. He was a very skinny teen that had crooked teeth. He was not that smart and yet he was the future leader of Rome. He had no compassion, especially with slaves. He treated them a lot like dirt and did not care if they suffered or not. He was just a spoiled brat that only thought about himself. The emperor hoped that I would get on with Cato, but it was so hard to get on with someone that had no values and was like a monster. Cato did not like me either. He thought that I was a primitive barbarian that came from an uncivilized nation. According to him, I was not born a Roman and I could never be a Roman. The most I could do was to pretend that I was one. I found out that Cato hated me. Maybe it was because I was a guest and I was a princess. Maybe it was because I was getting attention. Maybe he thought that I was a threat. A few weeks after I came, he pushed me against a wall and told me not to get too comfortable here. He reminded me that a dog had a higher status than a primitive animal like me. He also reminded me that being a princess of some dirt hole didn't matter anymore as Rome now controlled my people and my fate now was in the hands of Rome. I was shaking as he said this. Despite him being mean and evil, I knew that he was right. I was a hostage here and I could be put to death at any time. Frida was still friends with me and we had long conversations. One day, she was crying as she missed her parents and our homeland. She was worried about how everyone was. I knelt beside her and hugged her. I reminded her that Rome would treat our land well and we had our duty here to make sure the Romans know that we were nice people. Cato overheard all this and was mad that I was comforting a slave. He slapped Frida across her face and told her to do his chores. I was mad and stood up bravely and asked him if he wanted to hurt me. His face went red and I do think he wanted to hit me. He did not. He told me that I was under emperor protection. He also told me that I had to learn how to keep slaves in their place. The emperor called me to dine with him one evening. Cato was there and some men that I did not know. I sat and ate some food while being shocked at how much the Romans ate. I did not like Roman food all that much. They used a lot of fish sauce and they ate a lot of fish. The emperor was worried. The poor people of Rome were starving, as there was not enough food. He asked Cato what he thought and Cato proudly said to let them starve. He reasoned that the poor live in overpopulated areas and food shortages acted as population control. The emperor asked me what I would do. This made Cato laugh as he said girls knew nothing about such things. With all respect, you are the emperor that has a lot of responsibility, I started. Romans are like your children and you are their father. They trust in you. I am sure they love you, but this love can quickly become hate if they think you do not think you care. They will revolt and your life will be in danger. Rome is a large empire, so I would bring food in from areas outside Rome. Then I would sell it cheap to the poor. They would be happy and you would be a hero. Cato laughed at this, but the emperor scratched his chin. He told some men at the table to get some wheat in Egypt and use this to fill the storage areas in Rome. Until this was done, he ordered that the current supply will be given to the poor. Cato looked at his dad in a confused way. The emperor explained that it was important that Romans helped each other and was compassionate. It was his duty to show by example. A few days later, the emperor wanted me to take a walk. As we walked, he told me that I surprised him. He thought I was a simple salvage from some uncivilized land. Since I came to the palace, he was told I was very intelligent and creative. On top of that, he heard that I was polite and ladylike. He sighed as he said this and admitted that he wished that I could influence his son. I did not tell him what I thought of Cato. It was quickly known that the emperor took my advice and he even went on walks with me. I could see how the Romans and slaves looked at me. Their expressions showed contempt and hate. I knew what they were thinking. I may be dressed as a Roman. I may even look like a Roman. This being said, I was a princess from a tribe far away. They considered my tribe as barbarians, uncivilized, and we should all be slaves. Cato was right with one thing. I would never be accepted, and despite the emperor liked me, my life was in his hands. The emperor was impressed with me. He did not understand why I seemed so wise and intelligent. He thought that I was very compassionate and liked my thoughts that everyone should have a better life. He did not understand why his son was not that intelligent and why he did not care about others. This made the emperor worry about the future of Rome. I understood that. I also enjoyed the walk around the garden every day with the emperor. He was a nice man and cared about the Romans. He announced one day at a huge dinner party that he was worried about the future of the empire. Everyone looked worried and some laughed in disbelief. They thought the empire could never fall. The gods would never allow this. The emperor would not discuss this as he had a plan. I would be married to Cato and this will ensure that Cato could take some wise advice. I did not react to this, but Cato was very mad and stormed out of the room saying he would never marry someone so primitive and backward as me. Things went back to normal. I had no real friends as people did not consider me Roman. It was good that I had Frida. I found it hard to treat her like a slave. It was more fun when we would explore or play games or simply do things together. Of course, the Romans did not like this and would remind me that a Roman never gave a slave too much freedom or affection. I was told that slaves were like puppies, they needed to be trained. The emperor insisted that I would walk with him every day or come and sit by him. He would talk about politics and try to teach me about them. I did not think this was so interesting as I never was interested in politics. Some things were interesting, like how the emperor was afraid of the new Christians. They were growing in numbers and many considered them a threat. It was hard for me to listen to the hatred shown by the Romans. I knew I was a Christian, but I kept this a secret. The emperor became very fond of me and told people that he considered me as a daughter. He would give me new dresses and jewelry. I even had my pony. This generosity and attention I got were not liked by the others at the palace. I heard people whispering as I walked by them when people asked, "Who do I think I am?" Frida told me that the emperor was becoming more and more unpopular, as people were wondering why he was spoiling me, that many considered the daughter of the enemy. I could see that I was spoiled. One day, the emperor asked me if there anything in the world I wished. I told him that I wished that Frida was set free. Then she would be a friend. The emperor said that he would do this someday when the time was right. I tried being friends with Cato, the emperor's son. He hated me since I came. How can anyone hate another person, especially when they did not know each other? I did not like the fact that he did not like me. When I tried being nice and using all the charm I had, it did not work, as he just was meaner and seemed like he hated me more. I concluded that he was just a spoiled boy that could not think about others. I just had to live with the fact that he did not like me. Things got very bad when the emperor announced that a statue of a god was damaged by graffiti. Someone decided to paint the Christian symbol of a fish on it. Everyone thought this was the end of the world and the gods would be very mad and bring havoc down on Rome. I was more relaxed than the others that were in a panic. I figured the statue could just be cleaned. It was also because I was secretly a Christian. I knew that the Roman gods were not real, so no harm would come to Rome. What I didn't think about was that the Romans would blame this on every bad thing that happened. A few days after this happened, the emperor invited me on a ride through the city. He did this sometimes so he could meet and be with the common people. It was important for him that they could see him and that he cared about them. The emperor also admitted that it was nice when they cheered and were excited. It made him feel loved and wanted. This did not happen today. They jeered and shouted in angry voices. Much of the name-calling was at me as they called me names that I cannot even repeat. The emperor was sad and afraid and ordered that we would be taken back to the palace. The whole incident scared me, so I went to my room and hid there. Frida tried to cheer me up, but I snapped at her that I wanted to be left alone. I could see that this hurt her, but she did what she was ordered to do. She went and did some chores. Cato came into my room after he heard about what happened. I thought he would gloat and tease me. However, he smiled and was nice. He put some wine on a table and said that it was for the emperor and me when we had our daily conversations. I did not understand how a boy that openly hated me was suddenly being nice. He even said that I should not be sad about how much the Romans hated me. They see me as an outsider and some believe that I am one of the Christians. Cato told me that Romans would never expect a wild primitive girl that pretended to be a Roman. They would never accept me as one. Cato walked around my room and was quite nosy. I suppose as a spoiled crown prince, he could not respect anyone's privacy. When he looked in a chest I had, he seemed to get angry again and he shouted for the guards. The emperor was also summoned. Then things went fast for me and blurry as well. I was confused when my room was filled with guards and the emperor came. They were all shouting and pointing fingers. Some were giving me some angry looks. Some were shouting at me and asking why I have done it. I could not answer as I had no clue as to what they were talking about. I was confused and afraid. Even the emperor sighed when he looked at me and told the guards that I would be confined to my room. Then everyone left and I was all alone in my room. They even took Frida, so I was all alone in the room. It reminded me of when my mom grounded me in my room. This was so boring and I always hated it. At least I knew why I was being punished. No one told me as to what I have done wrong now. It was like I was innocent and yet being punished. I was confined until the emperor came that night. He told me that paint was found in my room and Cato accused me of painting the statue. Cato also accused me of being Christian. I pleaded to the emperor and told him that I did not paint any statue. The emperor smiled and said that it would be against my nature. He believed in my innocence and admitted that I had many enemies in Rome and the palace. The emperor hugged me and asked why Cato could not be more like me. I smiled back and told the emperor there is hope, as Cato bought some wine so we could drink it when the emperor visited me. The emperor smiled and sat down to drink some wine. I did not have any as I hated the taste of wine. After a few sips of the wine, the emperor held his neck as he was choking and could not breathe. I could see his face swell up as he fell to the ground. I shouted for help, but it did not matter. By the time the doctor came, the emperor was dead. I knew that the crown prince poisoned his dad with the wine. He most likely thought that I would drink the wine and be poisoned. It scared me to think that Cato could be so cruel as to poison Gi's own dad. I started to tremble as I thought that Cato was no longer the crown prince, he was now the emperor. The first thing that the new emperor did was to order his guards not to leave me out of this room. Frida was not allowed back to help me. I figured that she was down in the dark and damp cell. That left me alone except when the guard came in to give me food or something to drink. I had a lot of time to think. It was then that I realized how much I missed the emperor. He was like a friend and a substitute dad. He did not care if I was Roman or not. He protected me and made me feel safe. I was alone so I did what I knew best. I got on my hands and knees and prayed for the emperor. I wondered if he would go to heaven because he did not believe in God. He was a good man and cared about the Romans. He did his best as the emperor. The new emperor came in as I was kneeling and told me that he knew that I was a Christian all the time. Then he told me that I would never get my freedom as everyone suspected that I poisoned the emperor. This got me mad as I told him that he knew very well who killed the emperor and how could anyone kill their father? Cato glared at me and laughed, saying that there was no one to protect me. He left me as he continued with his wicked laugh. I slumped to my floor and knew that my life was in danger. Would the magic book save me? I was told that the new emperor sold Frida, so she was no longer my slave or here to be a friend. She was sold to a mine owner, which is probably the worst place a slave could be. I felt sorry for her and even cried as I knew that her body could not cope with the stress and the toil of the hard work that was at mines. I also knew that the new emperor sold her to show me how powerful and how evil he could be. Things became worse for me as well. One day, the guards came and took me down to the dark and damp cells. I was told that I was no longer a guest of Rome, but a prisoner of Rome. My dad had decided to fight the Romans. This of course upset me. I was his daughter, did he not realize that this put my life in danger? I had to get used to being in a cell with nothing to do and feeling cold, hungry, and alone. I thought I would be there forever. Cato visited me and told me that we were going on a trip. I did not trust him, but anything would be better than being in this cell. I was once again jeered at and called names as we went through the streets of Rome. The Romans saw me as an enemy because my father was at war with Rome. We went to the Colosseum and watched some gladiators fight. I do not know why the Romans liked this, as it was games with death and lots of blood. While I watched this exhibition of murder and death, Cato told me that my dad went to war, however, he lost and is now a prisoner of Rome. Then he bought a man and woman out. When the woman looked up, she saw me and started crying. I knew deep down that this was my mom and dad. Your mom and dad are here. Cato said, now they are enemies of Rome and you were always eager wanting people to think you are Roman. A Roman would put any enemy to death. Do you think that these people should die because they went to war with Rome, or should I send you down to reunite with them? I was angry with everyone. Why was I being forced to choose? I did not trust Cato. I looked at him and said that he is the emperor and the fate of my parents were in his hands. Cato smiled and said that since I did not protest, I condoned his decision to execute my parents. I closed my eyes as I heard my parents' final screams. It was not over. The guards dragged me down to the arena and I stood in the middle while all the Romans jeered me and threw things at me. Cato stood up and said that I was an enemy of Rome. He told the Romans that I poisoned his father and I did not care if my parents were shown mercy or not. He finished off by saying that I was a Christian and we could not be trusted. The gates opened and 2 lions came out. They looked very hungry. I closed my eyes and fainted to the ground. A fog started rising from the ground and there were thunder and lightning. The clouds went very dark. It was like nighttime. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was not home with my parents in 2020. I was standing in front of an old nun. To be continued. Signs of the Times God's Bride.